Quiver by Stephanie Spinner. This novel is for classroom use only. When I was an infant, abandoned in the forest, Artemis the Huntress sent a she-bear to nurse me. Soon after, a band of hunters found me, naked, kicking, and slick with bear grease. Knowing that only Artemis would save an infant girl in the wild, and eager to win the goddess's favor, the hunters took me in. As soon as I could walk, they taught me how to hold a bow. On the first day of my first kill, they told me how the stern, beautiful goddess had saved my life, and showed me how to offer to her. I did this solemnly, for I had long imagined her as my mother. Distant, yes, but strong and radiant as the moon. I knew her love was bound to shine on me again, if only I were content to wait. So I did. Part 1. The Hunt. 1. The caw of a crow warned me first. Then it was their smell, so rank it made my eyes water. I had never been so close to centaurs before, though of course I had seen them. There were many in my native Arcadia, wild, filthy creatures, notorious for their lack of restraint and far more dangerous than satyrs. When they drank, as they often did, to excess, they would rape and beat whatever women they could find, which was why women never ventured into the forests alone. I am not alone, I reminded myself. I am with the hunt and Caledon. Yet the centaurs were at hand, and the other hunters were too far off to be of help should I cry out. I would not. I would rather die. They came at a gallop, legs churning, chests heaving. I could run as swiftly as they. Indeed, I could outrun most creatures, human or otherwise, but there were two of them, and they were lust-maddened. I drew my bow. On they came, one with a torn ear, the other with a bulbous, red-veined nose. They were large and coarse and frightening, with none of the capering insolence that made their goat brothers almost endearing. Both had rough piebald coats, long matted tails, and hooves as big as mallets. Their stink was fearsome. I shot the one with the red nose first. He reared. I hit him again, and he fell, snorting blood. I loosed 2 arrows, then 3 at the other. He was so close when he toppled that I could feel his heat. He cursed me, groaning and choking. I backed away. They were huge creatures, and their great hooves kicked out as they died. "Safe crossing," I whispered. Then I heard a soft whistle that rose and fell like a question. Meleager, looking for me. I signaled back, and he emerged through the trees. As I moved towards him, I saw the concern in his dark eyes fade, and he smiled broadly. He is relieved, I thought, knowing it was more than relief that lit up his face. We had met only days before, when the hunt assembled at his father's palace, and since then Meleager had paid me many small courtesies, inquiring after my comfort whenever we chanced to meet, asking my opinion of his weaponry, introducing me to his beloved hounds. I required no more than any of the men, yet he sought me out time after time. I was flattered by his interest, for I liked him. He was straightforward and guileless, a man who preferred his hounds to his father's courtiers. He was a decent hunter, too, very good with the javelin, and passable with a bow. The dark stories about his fate, some said he carried a birth curse, made me feel a kind of kinship with him. Nevertheless, I had no desire for romantic entanglements. Like the men, I was here for glory. Moreover, I had taken a vow of chastity in honor of Artemis, and I intended to keep it. Seeing the yearning in Meleager's eyes, I resolved to tell him of my vow as soon as I could. I raised a finger in warning. I had lost the boar's scent, but he was cunning, and might be nearby. The sight of the slain centaurs stopped Meleager, but when he looked at me inquiringly, I shook my head. Explanations would have to come later. I started back up the hillside, and he followed. Before long, we could hear the others thrashing through the trees. Then all 27 members of the Caledonian boar hunt came marching downhill in crescent formation, armed to the eyebrows. No living thing in the forest could miss hearing them, or seeing them either. They moved without stealth, as if they were storming the walls of some hapless enemy city. I was certain that the boar would attack soon, and now, as the great hunt party advanced, I knew I had missed the chance to flush him out myself. I might have done it, I thought, if not for those stinking centaurs. They had likely cost me the head and pelt, and now the prizes of the hunt would go to one of the men. More than half of them were Argonauts, the intrepid, battle-scarred band who had sailed with Jason in search of the Golden Fleece. The adventure had made them heroes, and in the manner of heroes, each one of them considered victory his due. "Why did you leave?" whispered Meleager. "I smelled him." Then it came again, a heavy mix of smoke and fat and marshland mud, and with it tremors like those that shake the earth before it rips apart. He was very near. The hounds bayed. Then one of them screamed, a death cry. Meleager froze. His Laconian hounds were very dear to him. "There!" I pointed to a place 50 paces off. He was bigger than a bull, with bristles like skewers and filthy tusks as long as javelins. Steam came off his body like the foul nimbus of some underworld being. Even in morning light he seemed to stand in gloom. The hound on his tusk was dead, and he rid himself of it impatiently, tossing his massive head and stamping so that the ground shook. Then he wheeled, swiftly for all his bulk, to regard us with eyes as small and red as pomegranate seeds. It was the look of a beast without predators, who had never felt fear. My arrow was knocked, but Echion ran at the boar, shouting, and when he flung his spear, I hesitated. Even as the spear fell short, the boar charged. Echion's twin, Eurytus, along with Jason, Upalamus, and Iphicles, scrambled away as the creature hurtled at them like a rock from a catapult, crushing everything in its path. It trampled hounds, flattened trees, and flung Upalamus and Iphicles aside as if they were made of straw. Then Jason threw, but his spear went wide. He flattened himself on the ground, drawing his great shield over him as if he were a giant tortoise. Eurytus was nimble also, using his long spear to vault out of the beast's way and landing in a tree. Young Hippasus lacked the experience and the luck of his comrades. The boar veered suddenly and gored him before he could escape. He fell and lay still, arms and legs askew. Undaunted, Mopsus rushed forward. It was said he was gifted with the sight and could understand the language of the birds. Now he cried out to Apollo, lord of the silver bow. "If I have been your faithful worshipper, great Apollo," he cried, "grant me good aim." He must have been heard. His spear flew straight and true. Indeed, it should have killed the boar. Yet its jagged iron head came off in flight, and when its wooden shaft hit the boar's neck, it bounced to the ground as harmlessly as a broom handle. Meleager hissed in amazement. The boar grunted, flicking its tail. An all-consuming lightness, like heatless fever, came over me. My skin prickled as if a storm were coming, and my hearing grew so acute that I imagined I could hear the slow lap and surge of blood under my skin. I knew the signs. I had known them since girlhood. The goddess, I thought. She is here. Apollo had heard Mopsus, but Artemis, who had sent the boar to plague King Oeneus for failing to sacrifice to her, even now intervened. "Goddess, I am yours," I murmured. "If it pleases you, guide my hand." The boar lowered its head to charge at Mopsus, and at that instant my shot came clear. Flying as if Artemis herself had loosed it, my arrow struck the boar's neck and pierced its bristled hide. Blood spurted where it hit. Whispering my thanks, I flushed with pleasure. There was honor in drawing first blood. The beast shook its massive head, but the arrow stuck. Mopsus fled as the boar danced in fury, squealing. "Do you see?" cried Meleager. His voice thrilled with such emotion that the shot might have been his. "Atalanta has hit the boar!" Standing aside, unseen, are the god Apollo and the goddess Artemis. Apollo. "You might have let Mopsus take that shot, you know. He did invoke me." "Yes, but she's been praying to me for weeks. I had to give it to her." "Are you going to help her kill it, too? That would certainly cause an uproar." "It would. But there are others, even more interesting possibilities. And the hunt is far from over." "You frighten me sometimes." "I'm your older sister. I probably should." 2. Some on the hunt objected to my presence, whispering that it would bring misfortune. Others simply stared at me as if I were a white crow or a three-legged heifer. For all its prowess, it was a rude bunch. But I was used to such behavior, and to biding my time until a moment like this, when my shot hit home. It gave me joy to see the beast retreat, smashing into a thicket with my arrow piercing its neck, but I did not show it. Instead, I kept my face blank, a skill honed by years of practice, and sent another prayer of thanks to the goddess. "Well done!" cried Meleager. Jason raised his eyebrows at me, smiling his wry smile. He always enjoyed the surprise of others when they first witnessed my skill with a bow, though few reacted with as much pleasure as Meleager. The usual response was a mixture of disbelief and indignation, which Jason found comical. I forgave him because he was a brotherly friend of long standing, and because he truly respected my shooting. He had once said that I could win against anyone, even the greatest archers in Hellas, if such a contest were ever held. I treasured that remark. Ancaeus scowled and muttered something to Cepheus. The two were Arcadian, as I was, yet I felt no bond with them. Cepheus was a bully, a big man who walked with his jaw jutting out as if challenging the world to disagree with him. Ancaeus was a braggart, even bigger and louder than Cepheus. Worse, he went about in a bearskin. A bear had saved my life, so I disliked Ancaeus as much for his cloak as for his bad character. They had no affection for me either. In their view, women were creatures of servitude, best kept hobbled. I had outrun and outshot both of them, and this lack of deference they found impossible to forgive. They would not so much as acknowledge me on the tiny raft that took us from Achaia to Aetolia, and when the hunt assembled before King Oeneus the following day, they threatened to leave if I did not. A woman had no place on the expedition, Ancaeus had growled, looking around the hall for assent. There were a few barely perceptible nods, but no man there was stupid enough to voice his agreement. To do so would surely anger Meleager, to judge by his frown, and possibly the king. Oeneus had replied dourly that they could stay or go as they wished. It did not matter to him. So they had stayed, losing face and disliking me even more. Now Ancaeus brandished his big two-edged axe. "Here is a man's weapon," he shouted, "not some girl's puny arrow. No goddess can protect the boar from this." I was aghast. Ancaeus could say what he liked about me, but insulting the goddess was reckless beyond measure. She was quick to take offense, and even quicker to take revenge. I thought of Actaeon, a young hunter who had glimpsed Artemis bathing with her nymphs. He had not meant to see her naked, yet she was the last thing he saw as a man. Enraged that her modesty had been compromised, she changed him into a stag. His own hounds brought him down and mauled him to death. Then, howling inconsolably at what they had done, they died of grief. "Ancaeus," I began fearfully. He glared in my direction, then bellowed, "Make way for me!" The boar burst from the thicket, hitting Ancaeus in the groin with such force that he rose up, arms outstretched, as if offering to the gods. Thrust aloft, rocked this way and that on the beast's long, bloody tusks, he went to his death wide-eyed, without uttering another word. I shuddered. When Ancaeus fell, Meleager's two uncles hurried forward, pointing their spears at the boar. But Plexippus tripped on a root, waylaying Toxeus, and the two men went down, clearing a path for their nephew. He placed his javelin precisely, almost thoughtfully, in the very center of the boar's right side, and it sank in up to the wings. Excellent shot, I thought. The bear shrieked, whirling, and Meleager struck again, this time driving a long spear deep into its breast. Plexippus and Toxeus scrambled to their feet. Jason approached, spear upraised, but there was no need for another blow. The boar was weaving now, spewing foam flecked with blood. At last it toppled, making a sound like a harsh sob. At this, many drew near, though slowly. Mopsus knelt at the boar's head, awestruck. Cepheus spat, then turned away with a curse. Lyncaeus, Iphicles, Echion, and Eurytus, all Argonauts, stood together over it, murmuring that it was even uglier than the serpent that had guarded the fleece. None of them would touch the boar, though Jason dipped his spear in its brown, viscous blood. One by one, the rest followed suit. I stayed back. I alone had used a bow. "Someone should take Ancaeus's axe to its head," said Jason, looking around. "I will," said Cepheus grimly. He severed the head with 6 ferocious blows on his friend's weapon. Then he laid the axe on the ground, drew out his dagger, and set to flaying the body. It was slow work, but he shook his head at offers of help. As we stood watching, Jason said to Meleager, "Your father will doubly be pleased." Doubly, said Meleager absently. He was intent on Cepheus's progress. That it is dead, said Jason, and that you killed it. His face will be something to see when you present him with the head and pelt. Who knows? Perhaps he will even smile. King Oeneus had always been a man of few words. He had grown even gloomier since the autumn, when his oversight, he had forgotten to sacrifice to Artemis after the harvest, was followed by the appearance of the boar in his kingdom. It caused such havoc that many believed the goddess had sent it to Calydon. Rather than admitting his mistake and offering to her generously, Oeneus had called the hunt. Now the mangled fruits of it lay at our feet. That honor will go to Atalanta, said Meleager, looking at me with such ardor that my stomach dropped. What? Jason's exclamation came with a snort of disbelief. She was the first to draw blood, said Meleager. But you killed it. Everyone saw. Jason spoke slowly as if to a child. No matter, said Meleager, his dark eyes on me. I want her to have the spoils. It is my right to give them, he added, lest Jason forget that Meleager was both the host and the king's son. Oh, no, I stammered. I cannot accept them. Dismay made my voice shrill and louder than it should have been. Now Toxeus and Plexippus were listening. Cepheus, whose blood-besplattered face had remained expressionless until this moment, put down his dagger. His mouth hung open in an astonished sneer. I dreaded what he would say. Keep them, Meleager, said Jason quietly. It will only cause bad feelings if you do not. The prince said nothing. He had a streak of his father's stubbornness. Jason looked at me pointedly, prompting me to speak. Yes, keep them, I said. Please, Meleager. They are of no use to me. I spoke as if the words came easily, but they did not. No woman had ever taken such a prize before, one in the company of heroes, awarded by a king, and I truly yearned for it. But Jason was right. The others would take offense if Meleager had his way. The prince refused to heed us. You shall have them, he insisted. Jason sighed in exasperation. After a sudden, heavy silence, Cepheus jumped to his feet, gripping Ancaeus's axe. You insult us if you do this, he snarled at Meleager. The dead most of all. Meleager's hand went to his scabbard. And you forget yourself, Cepheus, he replied. No, nephew, said Toxeus, stepping in front of Cepheus. It is you who forget yourself. You are the son of a king, yet this woman, he pointed his chin at me, has you playing the dunce. Uncle, Meleager began warningly. A slut with dirt between her toes? Added Plexippus. He was the courser of the queen's two brothers and had been eyeing me since my arrival. Surely her favors can't be worth the trophies. Meleager's dagger was in his hand. He looked at his uncles with loathing. Do not say another word, he warned, or I will forget that you are my kin. Meleager, please, I said, just as Jason took hold of Meleager's arm. Perhaps it was Cepheus, lurching forward with the axe upraised, or Toxeus reaching out in a clumsy attempt to snatch Meleager's dagger, or even Jason shifting like a wrestler to block him. Yet something ignited Meleager's smoldering rage, and like a torch roaring into flame, or the sweep of fire through the dry grass, it consumed them all with terrible swiftness. I saw a tangle of bodies grappling and falling and coming apart, as one man struck another, and was struck in turn. Jason shouted and broke away with a gash across his arm. Toxeus sank to his knees, clutching his chest, blood striping his hands. Then Plexippus pitched forward onto his brother. Meleager's dagger had found him too. When it was over, Meleager had wounded a friend and killed two kinsmen. The sun beat down on us with a sudden white heat. Meleager turned to me almost blindly. Mouth dry, I backed away from him. Take the trophies, he said. Apollo and Artemis. Enough bloodshed. Do you think so? I wish you were more moderate, sister. That's your specialty, not mine. Besides, Oeneus hasn't learned his lesson. What a bulky old man he is. Haven't you punished him enough? Others will help me now. What do you mean by that? Wait and see. 3. Cepheus bolted, shouting curses. I bound up Jason's torn arm. Then we set off for the palace, with Toxeus's and Plexippus's bodies tied to one shield, and the boar's head and hide lashed to another. It was a searing morning. The air pulsed with heat that grew more intense as we came down from the hills. No wind stirred, and the sun blazed at us in a white-hot rebuke. Meleager had gone ahead, leaving me at the rear, and I took some comfort in this. His sudden, brutal rage had shocked me so that I could scarcely meet his eyes. I walked with Mopsus and Iphicles, who pulled the shields, trailed by a chorus of flies as persistent as the Furies. In the oppressively still air, my head ached and I itched with sweat, which trickled down my face and neck and into my wrist guard. My bow, normally so wieldy, was now burdensome, and my quiver strap chafed. I began to pray for a breeze. When the long line of huntsmen stopped briefly, and I saw Meleager sending 2 men ahead, I was stupidly pleased. Good, I thought. Now Oeneus will know we are coming. Forgetting for a moment the cruel events of the morning, I thought only of being welcomed back to the palace with food and drink and clean robes. I imagined the shadowy coolness of the women's bath, with its rush mats and lavender-scented pool, and resolved to offer to the goddess after I had cleansed myself. As for the dull metallic ache at the back of my throat, I put it down to thirst, for I had not yet learned to recognize the taste of disaster. Then it happened, in a grove of pine trees near the palace road. Because I was at the rear, I did not see Meleager stop, or begin to hop from foot to foot as if the pine needles were hot coals. Nor did I see the way he twisted and whirled in a kind of jerky, lunatic dance as the pain intensified. At first I heard a few voices raised in confusion, and then shouts. I thought one was Meleager's. Mopsus gasped loudly, his face contorting, and the line of men broke apart and ran downhill towards the trees. "What?" I cried, but the sight had shown Mopsus something so terrible that he could not speak. Seeing his face twisted with woe, I was seized by panic and ran. I was first to reach the grove. I found Meleager writhing on the ground, covered in pine needles. His hounds crouched nearby, ears flared, whimpering. Jason was backing away from the prince with a look of disbelieving horror on his face. "No!" groaned Meleager as I ran to him with my arms outstretched. "Do not touch me!" By then I could feel the heat, waves of it, and see the blisters bubbling up on him as if he were a boil from within. The sweat on his face steamed. Patches of his skin had started to blacken. I wanted to recoil from the stench. Instead, I forced myself to draw closer so I could hear what he was trying to say. Eyes rolling, he gasped that it was his mother, the queen, that she had set him afire. I screamed in vain for water. He died telling me he loved me. Apollo and Artemis. "Are you quite finished?" "Not quite. Nearly." Jason went into the palace. I could not bear to. Later he told me that when the bodies of her son, Meleager, and her brothers, Plexippus and Toxeus, were born inside, Queen Althea killed herself with a dagger. Then King Oeneus fell, clutching his heart. As the king lay on his bed wheezing, a trio of fat, speckled birds waddled into his chamber. They surrounded him, gabbing and pecking at his hands until he died. It was said that this too was Artemis's doing, that in a final vengeful flourish she had changed the king's 3 daughters, his last remaining children, into guinea hens. So ended Oeneus's royal line. 4. I have known Jason since I was a gangly 12-year-old, from a time before his exploits, his marriage, and his fame. He appeared in our settlement one day wearing a leather tunic, a leopard skin, and 1 sandal. His fair hair hung loose to his shoulders, and there were strange markings on his forearms, dark blue crosses and snakes. I had never seen such a man, and could hardly keep my eyes on my glue pot. Back then I helped Castor with the simpler tasks of boaring, like scraping sinew and making glue. Jason greeted Castor by saying that he had come all the way from Iolcus. "Iolcus, in Thessaly," replied Castor mildly. Thessaly was many days' journey from Arcadia. None of us had ever been there. To me it sounded as distant and exotic as Tiryns or Knossos, places at the end of the world. Jason nodded. "Your fame extends far beyond these mountains." My guardian said nothing. He disliked flattery. Jason went on. "I would like to buy one of your bows. I have heard that they are perfect." This was an unfortunate statement, for Castor had strong opinions about perfection. He said it was hard to find and harder to achieve, but hardest of all to forget. "I have no bows to sell, perfect or otherwise," he told Jason brusquely. "You have made your long trip in vain." "Truly?" Jason did not raise his voice, but it rang with incredulity. Castor shrugged, as if unaware that half a dozen bows, some newly made, others close to completion, hung from the trees in plain view. Another man would have argued or pleaded, but Jason did neither. He simply settled near the fire and watched Castor, who turned his attention back to the morning's task, heating and bending 2 long pieces of ash. Gently, slowly, he persuaded the wood to curve. I was less successful at ignoring the stranger. As I stirred the glue until it was smoother than honey, I kept wondering what he would do. He had the air of someone who was accustomed to having his way. After a long while, he said, "Chiron is my teacher. He told me the only thing that could save my shooting was one of your bows." Chiron the centaur was a great archer, admired for his wisdom and sobriety as well as his marksmanship. Later I learned that he had raised Jason from infancy, just as Castor and the other hunters had raised me. Castor snorted. "He has no taste for flattery, then." Jason laughed hard and long. "Ha ha ha, no." Finally, Castor smiled. "Would you care to try one?" he asked. Jason jumped to his feet. Yes, he said. "Of course." "Why not shoot against Atalanta?" said Castor. I looked up, startled. "If you can match her, I will give you a bow." "She shoots?" "She does." Jason could not suppress a laugh, perhaps at the notion that I could handle a weapon, or perhaps at my appearance. I was suddenly very conscious of my dingy chiton, my rough woven cloak, and my filthy bare feet. It was early spring, and the mountain streams were still edged with snow, which made bathing a truly Spartan exercise. I was not terribly clean, but at least I had braided my hair, which was more than I could say for him. When I returned from my shelter with my bow, Castor was pinning a rabbit skin to the great fir at the edge of the clearing. A few of the children appeared, as if they had smelled a contest, or heard of it on the wind. They were always shooting against one another, of course, and they had seen me practice countless times, but a match with a stranger was an unusual treat. They watched us with the wriggling intensity of young dogs awaiting food. 3 shots from 60 paces, said Castor, after Jason had chosen a bow. Left ear, right ear, head. He measured off the distance and drew a line in the ground with a stick. I no longer wore my cloak, but only my chiton. Now I fastened my wrist guard. It was a soft, supple thing made of spotted cat, a gift from Castor when I won my first shooting contest. It will protect your arm, he said. I prized it almost as much as my bow. Jason looked at me. I indicated that he should go first, and he stepped up to Castor's mark. He eyed the target, raised his bow to the sky in a swooping salute, then shot. His first arrow missed the tree altogether. His second came within a finger's breadth of the rabbit's right ear. His third shot, his best, hit the center of the rabbit's head. He stepped back with a slight nod. I realized he was pleased. Even then, I knew how to keep my face expressionless, but there was a trill of mocking laughter from the children, who had not yet learned to dissemble. Every one of them could shoot as well as Jason. Castor's frown silenced them. Before their laughter had died away, I had taken my 3 shots. The arrows formed a neat little pattern on the white fur, like an upside-down arrowhead. Left ear, right ear, head, I said. Jason stared at the target open-mouthed. Atalanta wins, said Castor. The young ones whooped and waved their arms, grinning rudely at Jason. Castor chased them off. I expected Jason to show anger or shame. They were the customary reactions when I won. Instead, he turned my way, lowered his head, and extended an arm to me, palm up. It was an unfamiliar gesture, baffling yet oddly pleasing. Your skill is wonderful, he said. His eyes were gray-green like dark water. I shrugged, blushing ferociously. Castor taught me. I also had a fine teacher, but instruction can only do so much, as I have just proved. He said this with such a wry smile that I could not help smiling back. Atalanta shoots better than I will ever hope to, he said to Castor. Castor nodded in agreement. Once again, Jason's smile was wry. He was wonderfully adept at refusing to take offense. "Though I have lost," he said to Castor, "I am loath to leave empty-handed. Will you not relent and sell me a bow?" "What do you think?" Castor surprised us all by asking me. I looked into Jason's eyes. "I think he will treat it well," I said. We were friends from that day. 5. Now I crouched outside Oeneus' palace, forgotten by everyone but Jason, who found me at dusk. At first I could not even look at him or speak. I was encased in misery, as if Medusa's scowl had turned me to stone. Jason wrapped me in his cloak and offered me some wine. I gulped it down, choking a little. Then I cried. I hated the sound of it, so weak and girlish, yet I could not stop myself. He sat with me for a long time. As the moon rose, he told me the story of Meleager and the Fates. "They appeared to Queen Althea when Meleager was born," he said, "and she asked them how long he would live." "As long as it takes for that stick of wood to burn away," said one, pointing to the fire. "Althea was horrified. The instant they were gone, she pulled the stick from the flames and hid it away. Time passed. She watched Meleager grow into a fine young man. The Fates were outwitted, or so she thought." I had last seen Althea as we departed for the hunt. She had wished me well, putting her small, bejeweled hand on my shoulder, reaching up to press her cheek against mine. She had beautiful dark eyes like her son, and the affection in them had touched my heart. I had thought enviously that Meleager was lucky to have such a mother. "She learned otherwise, and most cruelly," said Jason. I tried to imagine Althea's anguish when the Fates told her how soon her child would die. In attempting to save him, she had done what any mother would, yet how could she hope to outwit the implacable ones? No mortal has that power. The Fates simply lay in wait, anticipating the bloody clash between Meleager and his uncles. When it came, it transformed Althea from a protective mother into a murderous one, who killed her son to avenge her brothers. It was a sequence of events horrible beyond imagining. "She burned the stick?" I asked. Jason breathed out heavily, "and then took her own life." I closed my eyes. I should not have come, I thought. I should have sent an excuse to Meleager and stayed in Arcadia. If I had done so, only the boar would have died. The others would still be alive. As if he had heard me, Jason said, "Do not blame yourself for any of this." "How can I not?" I replied. "Even you would have not had me on the Argo. Fearing that he could not keep peace with a woman aboard, Jason had not invited me on the voyage to Colchis. I had failed to understand his reasoning at the time. I could think only of the glory he and his men had won. From the moment they presented the golden fleece to Jason's uncle, King Peleus, to his astonishment, for the fleece was guarded by an insomniac serpent with a deadly temper, Jason and his comrades had become demigods. Knowing this had made me all the more eager to join the hunt, and when Meleager sent word, I had literally raced all the way to Caledon, making the 4-day journey in 2.5. Nothing could keep me away. I burned to prove that I belonged in the company of heroes. Even if the boar were Artemis's creature, I told myself the goddess would understand my need. I had offered to her liberally before leaving. But what had I won in Caledon? Terrible sadness for the deaths I had witnessed, disgrace for the ones I had caused, a name that would be uttered with pity, or worse, linked as it was to the woes of this blighted kingdom, and shame for my kin who had taken such pride in me. It was difficult to speak. When at length I could, I asked Jason, haltingly, "What should I do?" "Go to Gortys," he said. 6. I left the palace before dawn, carrying only my weapons. Aura, Meleager's favorite hound, followed me out. I saw no reason to discourage her. She was a rangy, sociable dog, with a mouse-brown coat, light amber eyes, and a perpetually wagging tail. Now that Meleager was gone, she would need company. So would I. Gortys was many days' journey from Caledon, and though I was armed and could outrun anyone on 2 legs, Aura would surely be helpful. Bandits as well as centaurs roamed the hills. As we approached the gates, she darted ahead of me, neck extended, tail rigid. In the half-light I recognized the boar's head and hide lying near one of the stone pillars. Aura nosed the malodorous heap eagerly. It was not easy to pull her away. I wondered if the great trophies of the hunt would be left there to rot, or if they would be fed to the funeral pyres later in the day. Costly offerings, I thought. The cypresses guarding the palace stood black against an electrum sky. A damp wind promised rain. We took the eastward track downhill. Aura bounded ahead, following her nose. Every now and then she would turn to hurry me on, barking and swinging her tail. I jogged, allowing her to lead, and we went quickly. At mid-morning we stopped at a stream. Clouds of mist hung in the pines. The forest floor was slick with their needles. Here and there clumps of white cyclamen, Artemis's flower, gleamed like fragments of the moon. Satisfied that we were well and truly alone, I bathed in the icy water. Once cleansed, I prayed silently to the goddess, dedicating my journey to her and asking for her blessing. "I am yours," I whispered, as I always did. Then Aura ate a squirrel, and we moved on. Even in Arcadia we knew of the oracle at Gortys, which was dedicated to Asclepius. Like his father, Apollo, Asclepius was a great healer who could mend broken minds as well as broken bodies. Supplicants to his oracle slept in caves, hoping to receive their cures in dreams. Some went for relief, others for answers. Jason had visited the oracle in secret before embarking on his quest. "I dreamed of the fleece," he told me, "and of a beautiful, bewitching woman. With 2 such omens, I came away happy." In Colchis, he had met the woman in his dream, a princess called Medea. She had used powerful magic to help him, and later became his wife. I had also heard tales of miracles at Gortys, of the blind regaining their sight, of the palsied rising up and bounding away, and of barren women — it was one of the few oracles where women were permitted — becoming fruitful within days. I cherished the stories of a mute boy who regained his speech after dreaming of silver-tongued Apollo. I wondered if I, too, might dream of Apollo, for I had spoken little since the hunt, responding even to Jason with grinding effort. It was as if I were a child again, overhearing the hunters talk of what my father had done. Left her to die. Didn't want a girl. The words, flatly spoken, had so transfixed and bewildered me that I had been mute for days. Now, too, I felt wrapped in silence, as if my grief were a heavy, stifling garment I could not shed. I ran on, ignoring my pangs of hunger. I had not eaten since the hunt, and would not until I had reached Gortys. In this small way, I thought to honor Meleager's death. 7. Early the next morning, we waited at the shore for the boatman, an old fellow as gnarled and squat as a tree stump. He had ferried me across this same deep channel only 10 days before, with Ancaeus and Cepheus. Their loud conversation with him had not ceased for all the time of crossing. Today it was different. Seeing me alone, he was full of questions. I made him understand with gestures that Ancaeus and Cepheus were gone. It may have been this grim news, or the flash of Aura's teeth when she bared them, but he left us in peace after that. When at last we reached the far shore, I gave him 2 small game birds in payment. One was for his silence. A vast sandy plain stretched before us. Mountains loomed to the north, with Gortys in the foothills, 2 days' walk from here, and 2 more from home. We had much distance to cover, and again Aura set the pace, bounding ahead as if released from a trap. We were soon loping along in unison, enjoying the windy salt air with its fishbone and seaweed perfume. When they saw us approaching, groups of children would run down to meet us, and Aura would circle them, prancing and wagging her tail. They would often try to race us, screaming with excitement when I let them catch up, and shouting in surprise when I shot ahead. At such times, Aura would bark sharply, joyously. Like me, she was happiest in the lead. After a time, I knew only the steady slap of my feet and the pounding of my heart. The waves beat nearby like a soft, insistent drum, and my mind eased, then stilled altogether. I was in motion, but I might have been sitting under a tree, dissolving into the breath of the forest. I ran on, as if I were passing a shadowy crowd of straining opponents, one by one. The sky went from crimson to indigo. The moon rose, veiled in drifts like cobwebs. Lights, torches, flickered in the distance. Hearing chanting, I stopped. We had reached the oracle. 8. Apollo and Artemis. She's fast! Chaste, too, and devoted. Then why are you making her suffer? I didn't mean to. It was bad planning. Shall I send her to a good dream? I was hoping I could count on you. The cave was small, and low enough to make me stoop, but the straw pallet was laid with a cloud of fluffy white ram skins, and a rough drawing of Asclepius the healer, complete with snake-entwined staff, hovering reassuringly on the wall. The silence inside was complete. With the sound of my own heartbeat sounding in my ears, I looked around in the torchlight, overwhelmed by the sense that I had been here before. No harm will come to me in this place, I thought, as the cave embraced me in some powerful yet long-forgotten fashion. With the thought, my bones fairly melted, and I dropped to my knees in exhaustion. Aura settled herself near the entrance, and the attendant who had greeted us and led us here, her name, she said, was Zoe, hobbled out. A moment later she returned with a small terracotta cup. "Drink after you pray," she said. Her eyes, a clear innocent blue, met mine for the first time. "Heed well what you dream." She gave me the cup. When I was alone, I asked Asclepius to heal my heart sickness. I asked Artemis to guide me with a firm hand. I asked Zeus, Lord of all creation, to smile on Meleager's shade and grant it peace. The dark liquid smelled like wood tar. It was terribly bitter, but I drank it all. Then I slept. I am in a shadowy, high-ceilinged room. A man sits before me, wrapped in a cloak. His face is waxen, his eyes red-rimmed, and he is gaunt enough to be mortally ill. There are 3 golden bowls on the floor before his throne, brimming with bloody organs and entrails. From their size, I guess they are animal rather than human, and wonder if they are offerings. The man beckons, and the heavy gold rings on his long fingers clack like bones. I do not wish to show fear, but I hesitate. Seeing this, he grins hugely. Artemis and I are in a pine grove, reclining together in the manner of old friends. Her great hound, Phoebus, lounges nearby with Aura. The air is soft and fragrant, and I am completely at ease with the goddess, as if she and I often pass the time together this way. I feel I can ask her anything. I have been wondering what to do now that the hunt is over, I say. "Whatever you do," she replies, lifting her fine eyebrows, ever so slightly for emphasis, "avoid marriage." Her eyes, catching mine, are a pale gray-green, the color of lichen. "Marriage will bring you trouble," she adds. I have very little interest in marriage. "More trouble!" I exclaim lightly. "Is that possible?" She laughs, revealing a tiny gap between her 2 front teeth. "Anything is possible," she says mischievously, "but surely you knew that." Now I do, I think. I repeat her words silently, and they warm my heart. Anything is possible. I am running along the ocean. The sand is as fine as white as linen, welcoming me with every stride. I hear the deep thrum of footsteps behind me and know that I am in a race. My legs have never felt stronger. I might be wearing winged sandals like Hermes, messenger of the gods. I pick up the pace without effort and pull far ahead of my opponents, breathing deeply and easily, enjoying the absolute certainty that I will win. I am lying in a thicket of brambles, curled around a small warm body that nuzzles me, mewling. My eyes are closed. I am exhausted, yet so wonderfully content that I fairly vibrate with happiness. I find the body, so tiny next to mine, and lick it again and again and again. 9. I woke slowly to the warm, wet touch of Aura's tongue on my face. From her insistence and her expression of concern, I guessed that she had been trying to rouse me for some time. I patted her silky head, wondering how long I had slept, then stumbled outside. The sky was the powdery blue of a jay's crest, the sun directly overhead. No wonder Aura had been anxious. The day was half gone. I stretched, yawning, and as I stood there with my arms flung wide, my dreams came back to me, one by one. Bright, tremulous, and clear as rocks in a mountain stream. Startled, I sank to my knees. 4 dreams, I thought. 4 messages. I settled on the ground, cross-legged, and closed my eyes. They came to me without effort, and I admired each one as I might admire an exotic flower or a finely wrought javelin. They were beautiful. Even the first, so fraught with menace, gleamed alluringly. The rings sparkled, the organs in the golden bowls shimmered like jewels. I vowed to remember them always, for I knew they were precious even if their meaning was obscure. They had been sent, that was enough, and I was grateful. My understanding would come in time, for now I felt forgiven, though for what I could not tell, and blessed. My eyes filled, and I heaved such a gusty sigh of relief that Aura rushed over to me, whining. She barked, eyes aglow, then cocked her ears at the sound of my rumbling stomach. I sprang to my feet. "Let's eat," I said. Apollo and Artemis. "Well done, brother. Thank you." "You are welcome. I do enjoy doing prophetic dreams. These were lovely, though you may have revealed too much with that last one. The fur, the licking." "Great thundering Zeus! She's happy now, isn't she? She's talking again, isn't she? I thought you wanted to help her." All right. Forget I said anything. The dreams are wonderful, and they will help her in ways that I never could." "Is that an apology?" "Older sisters don't apologize. You know that." When I met Zoe on the path to the beach, she greeted me by saying quietly, "Your prayers have been heard." Smiling, I replied, "I am fortunate." The Huntress had told me this so often, usually when I was howling with outrage at some terrible childhood injustice, that it felt odd to be just saying the words with such conviction, to know beyond a doubt that they were true. She tilted her head appraisingly. Her hair was as white as sea foam, her face as lined and weathered as driftwood. "You are hungry?" I laughed. "So hungry." "Come." She led us down to her tiny whitewashed hut. Next to it, sheltered by the tall pines, was a shrine, and a painted wooden statue of Asclepius. Dappled sunlight played across the god's face, which wore a placid smile. Zoe brought bread, honey, dried fish, figs, grapes, and a jug of lemon water. I placed an offering of food on the shrine, bowing. Then Aura and I consumed every remaining morsel. When I finished, I thanked Zoe, adding, "I am Atalanta, from Arcadia." "The Huntress." I must have looked surprised that she knew. "You arrived with a hound carrying a bow," she said, dryly, adding, "I also have been sent dreams. One of them was about you." I waited. "You stood before Artemis and Aphrodite," she said. "They asked you to choose between them. You chose Artemis." So I would, I thought. My loyalty had always been to Artemis, mistress of the wild. Aphrodite, who busied herself in snaring lovers, seemed soft and foolish by comparison. At my nod, Zoe said, "The decision brought you pain, a wound," she faltered, her eyelids fluttering like moths. "A wound?" The words filled me with alarm. I had never been injured, and feared the experience mightily, though I kept that to myself. "Sudden, very deep, that is all I know." She placed a small brown hand on mine. It was as light and dry as a withered leaf. "Your fame as a hunter will grow," she said, patting me. "Poets down the years will sing of Atalanta's strength, her wild spirit, her beauty. The splendor of your legend will far outlive you." Joy and bewilderment made me flush. If Zoe's words were true, I would have all the glory I had ever yearned for. Yet how could she know my future? "How?" I began. Ignoring me, she pulled herself to her feet. I rose hastily. "Please tell me," I asked her. "Did you dream that also?" The smile on her face was as enigmatic as the statue's. "Safe journey home," she said.